Hi everyone, we are heading to the beach today. Yet again, can you tell I'm in need of a holiday? So those lovely seashells that we painted a few weeks back, we're going to get those again and we're going to put them in situ with a lovely washing wave over the top. So grab your paints and let's get started. Right, so we need to mask down our piece of paper. Once again using washi tape, not masking tape because that's just a little bit too sticky. And that might rip up your paper as you go. And my piece of paper is 7.5 inches by 6 inches. And I just, for my pencil, all I'm going to do is I'm going to just sort of give myself a rough sort of sense of where the water is going to come down to. And if you wanted, you could give yourself a very sort of vague sense of where your shells are going to be too. But these are shells that we have painted in a previous tutorial, and we did those without drawing in the shapes, so you can go and have a little look at that tutorial if you like, but I've just drawn them in nice and lightly with my HB pencil. And now I'm going to use my, I've got my large brushes here, I've got a mop brush that I'm just going to wet the paper with. Doesn't really matter which way you do it, I just felt inclined to sort of come down in the same direction as the sea that we've got being painted in here. But we're making the whole page wet. When we say wet, so it's just a nice light coverage of water all over, but there are no puddles of water, so you're almost using your paintbrush to sort of scoop up any excess after that point. And I think this is a fantastic brush to actually paint in the colours, the washes I want. So I've got some yellow ochre mixed with cadmium yellow, which is going to be my sort of main sandy tone. And I'm going to paint quite dilute. I want to just start painting in from here, nice and light, and we're going straight over into here. And then I'm just going to bring in the tiniest bit of green gold down here. So this is a yellowy green tone, and I want to help my layers that are going to be painted on top by just bringing in these colours from the start. So we're just sort of trying to build up the sea, the greenness of the sea. Here's some cobalt turquoise, just blending in to there. Trying not to overwork it too much, and also just trying not to put too much in either. And then just a tiny bit more of a bluer turquoise. Okay, really nice and light though. Okay, we need to let this dry 100%, and then we're going to paint in our shells. This is going to be a fun kind of layering process that we're going to really sort of think quite cleverly about how we're going to create this little seascape. Right, I've swapped in my smaller brushes, and I've got my 3 shells I'm going to paint here. So if you haven't already had a look at my rather nice it was a shell heart tutorial a few weeks back, just in my illustration playlist, but we went through how to paint all these lovely seashells that I had picked up on the beach with my mum when we'd been walking Crumble and Lola. Lola is my mum's dog, and they very much enjoy a run around on the beach. But we painted them in a really nice sort of loose style, as you can see I'm doing here. And I'm just using the real thing as my inspiration, which is always a real sort of special thing when you've got the real thing in front of you of whatever it is you're painting. But just for those of you who haven't seen that tutorial and you're like, I'm watching this one, so teach me here. Well, I will do. This is a combination of Payne's Grey and burnt sienna, really. And I've just created the shape with a nice bit of wet paint, then cleaned off my brush using a size 2 brush, and I've just been creating texture by not playing around too much with it, just allowing it to do its thing. That's probably the one that relies most on the loose watercolour technique. If I take a bit of yellow ochre here and just sort of the dregs in the palette, so shadowy mixes, the limpet here. Again, I'm just going to begin with a kind of rough outline and then start to bring in the lines, the sort of ridges into the centre. That's this one here I'm having a go at. And then just using a slightly more concentrated sort of burnt sienna, Prussian blue, you can really make that wonderful rough outline whilst it's all still wet. And I just like to sort of play around a little bit with it. You bring up the colour up one side of each of the little ridges, and in the middle there we're just playing around with watercolour. But like I say, I've got a really nice tutorial focusing on all those shells. But what's lovely is, even though we're painting quite loosely with these, we're painting with some strongish colours, and these are just settling in so nicely on top of the wash we did before. Even this last one I'm going to do, which is probably a lot lighter than the others. So this is the little sort of scallop style shell here. So again, using the loose approach. And this is all with my size 2 brush. I'm using a combination of yellow ochre, and then I've got some permanent rose, which I've just mixed in to give it a slightly pinkier tone. And there is some burnt sienna in there just to keep it nice and earthy. I'm very keen to just make these shells nice and fluid and natural, and not spend too much time on them. But they're going to really stand out in this piece because they're going to contrast the wave washing over them. Now, one thing that is important to say that I haven't said yet, but it's all my materials are in the episode notes, so that's where this has been written from the beginning, is we're going to be using a little bit of white gouache, which is a more opaque sort of watercolour paint. You do get a white watercolour, sort of Chinese white I think it's called, which is helpful to sort of thicken colours or just sort of make interesting new pigments. But we need a more opaque white for the final touches when we're going to be adding sort of spray to the waves. So if you haven't sort of already got that to hand, you could also use acrylic white. I know a lot of you enjoy painting in many different mediums, so I'm sure that somewhere in your paint collection there might be something that will do the trick. Anyway, I'm just going to allow these to dry, then add in a bit more detail, and then we'll get on with the actual water itself. So just finishing adding little sort of ridges of texture where I see them. This is sort of all about just kind of having a close look at these things and just finding where you can use your brush to kind of replicate. So once those are done, place these to one side. It's time to have a think about the water as a whole. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow the washes that I've done here, and we're actually going to create the wonderful sort of light and dark mingling of water and foam through painting in negative space. And this is what I mean. So this might seem a bit sort of bonkers, but we're just going to paint in lots of sort of funny little kidney shapes, starting with that turquoise colour. And you can see I'm almost sort of creating like a giraffe pattern camouflage. And I'm using quite a large brush. I'm using a size 6 brush, but because it's got a wonderful point, if you don't have quite so crisp points on your brushes, you might want to try something a little bit smaller. But now I'm sort of moving into the more turquoisey area, so I'm going to add some turquoise to my mix, keeping it quite dilute, and just start to paint all the way down. So you can see how the colours have gradually changed as we've moved our way down the page, but now it's all about how we layer over the shells. Now with watercolour you can layer, no problem, but we usually recommend that you start with your lighter colour first and layer darker colours over the top. So this seems a bit strange what I'm doing, but I don't have any intention for these watery shapes that I'm painting at the moment to really show up much over the shells, but we're going to get the faintest hint that they are there. So if I just mix up a little bit more of my turquoisey green gold, keep it nice and dilute, here we go. So like I say, we're barely going to see it at all at this stage, but when watercolour dries, it creates a lovely crisp edge that will show up just that tiniest bit. Now the other very important thing is that your shell shapes must be 100% dry, because we don't want to be disturbing the colours underneath too much. I mean, if not at all, ideally. And so the other way we do that is by using as few brush strokes as possible. And that's why another reason of having a large brush is a great idea for this kind of thing. And my colours of the little wave, I'm going to call them wave pebbles because they are the water, but they look a lot like funny little stones at this point. These are also, we're going to get these just going a little bit more of the yellow ochre colour, just to really bring them in line with the sand underneath, because the idea is that the sea is getting shallower and shallower, and we're seeing more and more of what lies beneath. So I'm just going to finish up until my pencil line, and then we can start to look at making this really come to life. And now it's time to get a few more sort of washing waves on the shore. So I want a really dilute shadow mix. So I'm just adding lots of water to up here and just add it in right here. And what I'm going to do is just paint in along that line to start off with. Because what we're going to do is we're going to kind of trick the eye, I guess. And I'm going to paint in a second washing wave by starting off. Do you see that suddenly we've got a sense of this sort of wave washing in, and we've got the darker beach, so we've got a little bit of that yellow ochre, and then adding a bit more of the shadowy mix to it. And what's happening there is we've got the dry page here, and I made that bit wet and I just added a little bit of the shadow, and that suddenly created a bit more of a crisp edge. And then I can just blend this one in, and that's given us an extra sort of washing wave. And I think I'm going to paint in one more, so come down here, and I think we'll have it washing sort of partly over our final seashell. So we'll just blend that in on that side and add the shadow on that side. It's rather clever, that. Okay, so now it's time to get our thicker white paint into place. So I'm just going to get my white gouache, allow this to dry, and then we can add in lots of lovely detail. Okay, I'm excited because we're now into the sort of final stroke. There's basically two key stages left. The first one is to just make our ocean just a little bit more watery, and in doing that we have to make sure that our little shapes have been dried 100% before I'm now going to go over it with one last wash to just really create a lovely sort of deeper blue feel. I'm just getting a bit more green into my wash. And what it does, it's a bit like when I'm painting a rose and all my separate little entities suddenly need just softening a little bit. We just use a light wash over a dried piece to really tie it all together. I'm trying to do it in as few brush strokes as possible, and I'm still mimicking the colours that I've got painted in. And of course we're about to go over our shells as well, so we really want to make sure that we do this in as few brush strokes as possible. But I'm going to stop just shy of coming in to the final bit because I want to create one last sort of rippling washing wave. Okay, well whilst that dries we can now play with some gouache. So in my palette up here I've just put some white gouache in. It's a solid, much more thicker paint that I've got here that I just add a little bit of water to get nice and creamy really, and I am going to paint it along the edge of my wave, and I'm going to sort of dab the brush. I'm using a size 2 brush, and I'm trying to sort of create the foam of a wave. And this is the first sort of instance where you start to see how the shells being layered up over the top of really start to suddenly work. You want to have your gouache quite thick. I mean, I'm just sort of scooping it out of there, placing it into my palette and adding bits of water. and contrasting it against that little shadowy line that I've painted in is really going to help really make the most of the white that is there. Okay, and then I'm going to take the next line that I painted in, nice and dry. You see the previous one just is coming in over the top of it, so I just need to be careful. But I also quite like the idea of just mimicking one or two of those shapes that we had, just getting smaller and smaller until it becomes a little bit of foam. It's a proper sort of involved piece, this, so I hope you've sort of taken a bit of time for yourself today to come and paint it with me. So I'm just going to carry on painting along these ripples, and all the while my main ocean is dry, or drying, and you see I'm painting over this next shell here. It's just a lovely way of trying another sort of way of incorporating the seashells that we find on the beach into a lovely piece of art. So for this last wave, the sort of little bits of like the webbing that I've started to do here, for these last bits they're actually going to suddenly meet up with actual shapes that I've painted, which also means that we're going to find we're painting in over the top of the shells, which is just one other way of really making them feel part of this wonderful sort of underwater piece. And then I'm going to gradually sort of fade out the gouache so it's not quite so strong, so that we're not actually painting over every single one. And then just adding more dots of foam. So I like to just sort of do it until your brush runs out, really. And then we're just going to dot a few extra little splashes onto the page, and I'm going to do that by just flicking the brush onto the page. Even down here, I think it just looks really quite fun. And there you go. So you could sort of continue on in adding extra bits of shadow here and there. Sort of, there's always a sort of nice scope to add more sort of darkness wherever there is lots of light. But I'm really rather thrilled with how these shells have contrasted with the light. I think they look rather fantastic, and I really hope that you have a go at this and don't think that it's too intimidating, because it is very much a kind of a piece that you sort of enjoy as you go along, and sort of just keep sort of trying new things out, to be honest. So there we go. Let's have a little look. Now you'll notice how the wet paint has gathered along the side there. What I would do is get a bit of kitchen roll and just soak that up if it hasn't all seeped in, because we've been using quite a lot of water. And there you go. Seashells under the sea. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I want to say a massive thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating videos like these that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on. And if you want to tag us on social media with your paintings, then it's at the Winton Paper Co on Instagram. And of course, if you never want to miss another video, just hit the subscribe button and that little notification bell. Until next time, bye!